In at number 10, we have got the Megalosaurus, and this creature is just so full of great abilities, and compared to maybe something like the Rex or the Spino, this creature really doesn't get as much as I think it deserves to in actually how much damage this creature can do, and what this creature like really can do in terms of like it can really pack a punch in any kind of battle scenario. This creature does hefty amounts of damage, which most people probably don't even think of, as they just think, well, this thing sleeps in the day, it must be completely useless. And although there is a slight hindrance to that, I still think it is well worth it, because in the night time these things are so vicious. If you're on operation, then you're gonna have a pretty easy time with this thing, because obviously it counts as nighttime all the time, so you can use it all the time. But still, on every other map, they're really great for boss fights if you want to do that with them, and they can even grapple small creatures in their mouths, and they're pretty good alpha killers as well. And they're alright at caving as well. Maybe they don't fit into quite as many caves as the Barionics, but they still do fit into pretty much all of them, as you know, they're quite a decent size, and they're pretty decent just like general traveling mounts, and really good like they're really good at also defeating the dragon, actually, which is a point which I should add, because these things can kill the Dimorphodons very easily as they can grapple them in their mouths, and it's actually a pretty decent boss strat, which I would definitely recommend you doing as long as you have high enough level Megalosauruses, because you know the dragon's particularly harsh to some carnivores. Now, some of you may kind of be hating on me a little bit for putting this better than the Megalosaurus. I don't maybe think that this is a better creature than the Megalosaurus. It's just for what it does, it's more useful for the general Ark player. But personally, I would go for Megalosaurus over the Casterides. It's just the Casterides is such an insane gatherer of wood. I have to put it higher because wood is just such an essential resource in Ark, and also you can get using it earlier as well. It's easier to tame because it spawns in a much nicer environment, and it's also a pretty good underwater mount as well, and you can gather quite significant amounts of energy paste from the beaver dams of this thing. But there is the next creature on the list, which I think is a significantly better way of getting all of that cementing paste gathered, of course. And these things also have a smithy as their saddle, which, you know, a portable smithy if you want to repair any of your metal items. Not really as useful as on the RG, but, you know, it's still a really nice thing to have. And I actually remember when this thing came out, and then that feature was there, and it was actually a pretty cool thing. Although, again, like I've said, the RG, it makes more sense for that creature, as it's this creature's not going to be the one to transport loads of metal around. Next up, we have got the Boufo, and this creature is, in my opinion, just so overlooked. Like, people don't, like, they'll acknowledge this creature, like, they'll look at it and they'll just be like, well, it exists, but I'm never going to use it. Like, what's the point of this thing? I have beaver dams for all of my cementing paste used. Like, I don't need this thing whatsoever. But the fact that this is, like, it's just, it really does have an extremely great use for me, because obviously it's a really great cementing paste gatherer, and until you've used it, you probably won't know actually how good this thing actually is, because you're probably just like, well, beaver dams do it all for me. And I'm going to say they don't. You can gather just so much cementing paste with this creature. It's absolutely insane. Like with the insect cave, especially on ASA, actually, as insects don't have levels anymore, you can get thousands, if not tens of thousands of cementing paste in one run, which will probably encumber you, but still, you can really gather just so much of the stuff, and it's pretty decent underwater as well, which again does play quite a nice big benefit towards it. Next up, we have got the Quzel in at the number 7 spot, and this creature is just one of those where I kind of just have to include it, like, instinctively. I feel like people just severely undervalue and overlook the Quzel for what it actually is, because it doesn't need to be the fastest flyer out there, although maybe you might say it's really boring to just fly around on a slow flyer. If you build your base near to a mountain, then you're going to be fine, and it's no slower than something like a raft is, and people use that all of the time, and you can gather, well, not gather, but carry so many resources with this creature. And when you have a platform saddle on top of it as well, you can have your own portable base there, and although maybe it might move slower than you want it to, you can still get a heck of a lot of resources across the map in quite a timely fashion, compared to some other smaller creatures which will go faster because their weight isn't big enough, so you need to take several trips, or even some creatures which can, but then they're on land and they tend to be a little bit slower, and obviously you're in land as well, you'll be dealing with many other obstacles, where when you're in the air you can kind of just go in a straight line. So that's why the Quetzal's here. Next up, we've got the Crystal Wyvern, and I feel like people really undervalue this creature. I know it's an overlooked tier list, but I will say undervalued a lot in this, because they're kind of similar with each other. Overlooked is like to kind of skim over something, really, is kind of the general definition. And with a creature like this, I think people just devalue it for its tame method compared to the normal Wyvern, because it's so much easier, so therefore this must be so much worse of a creature. Well, this thing is pretty much, I'm pretty sure actually, it's just the same strength as the Wyvern. And with the Blood Crystal Wyvern, it really does prove an extremely useful one. With all the main features of a Wyvern, just you get actually a nicer ability. The Blood Crystal Wyvern by far has the nicest ability out of any Wyverns out there, and they also have the hydration buff, although maybe not the most useful because they're flyers. But you know, you ever stick their feet in a little bit of water, or you get those wings to touch water when you're actually flying over a lake, you can get that hydration buff, which again is going to buff you. And you can also use these things in the boss fight of Crystal Isles, so they must be pretty strong to actually like be useful in that fight, and they definitely are. So you really shouldn't undervalue these things for their tame methods. And I know there are a few things which make it a little bit more annoying, because the primary crystals are a little bit annoying to get, and the level 65 like starting level can be a little bit of an annoyance, but trust me, once you get those things down, you're really going to have a good time with these creatures. At number 5, we have got the Megalodon, and in my opinion, this is pretty much my favourite underwater creature to use, just for like general combat and all of that. And yes, a Mosasaurus is going to be great and do all of that, but I find that a little bit too big and bulky for me, and the Megalodon is just a sweet spot. And I would say the Basilos not really an overlooked creature, which is why I haven't included it on this list, is it's a really great creature, and obviously it doesn't get hurt by the electric eels and the jellyfish, which does play a huge benefit. But I feel like people don't give the Megalodon enough credit for what it actually deserves, because it really is a powerful creature, which does have an alpha variant, so it means Wildcard did definitely care about it when designing it. And when Ark actually came out, this was like one of the only ocean creatures actually in the game at the time. And also they deal the bleed ability as well, which again does play a huge factor when it comes to the damage dealing of these creatures. They can just deal a lot more damage because of that bleed ability, which makes them pretty good combat creatures. And if you're thinking of doing the Moda on Genesis Part 1, as always, just tame yourself an X Megalodon and you're going to have yourself a blast of a time. Obviously you're not going to have one, you're going to have multiple, but I find they kind of do better for that boss fight, the Modas, because they don't get stuck in the whirlpools as much. Next up, we've got the Volonosaur, and this creature is essentially a portable turret. And I know there are a couple of you out there that just really don't like this creature or value it, and you know, you can be that person, but still, for me, I really like this creature. I find its abilities quite cool and inventive for me, and it's quite useful to hit creatures from long range. And you might think it's a bit gimmicky when you first use it, but then I'm at a stage now where I really like it. And with the Volonosaur on Gen 2, you can have an even more powerful version. Obviously you wouldn't use the kind of spikes of this close, but I'm just kind of generally showing you a demonstration. And sadly they don't scale when you level up melee damage, only the melee attacks, but those melee attacks are pretty hefty as well. And again, with the size of this thing, it makes it a pretty decent caving creature as well, which you maybe might not expect, especially on Extinction actually, because those caves are really big and you can just quickly get through them. Obviously you're not going to be doing any of the titans with this creature, because it's nowhere near as powerful as something like a Giga or a Archaeoptics, so it probably doesn't really have too much of a chance against the Titans. But against pretty much everything else in Extinction on other maps, actually, you can even use it for some boss fights on some other maps, although maybe wouldn't recommend it the most. They really do pack a punch, and they're pretty decent for some PvP scenarios as well, although I'm mainly a PvE player. Next up, at number 3, we have got the Barionics, and this creature for my uses is the go-to caving creature, and I feel like people don't give this creature enough credit for what it actually can do, and just resort to creatures like the Shadowmane because it's the newer creature that's just like the better one, supposedly. And I do admit the Shadowmane largely is better than the Barionics, but still, that thing is significantly harder to tame than the Barionics, and a lot less accessible as well. And I still kind of like to go back to my nostalgia-y roots, which you might think is maybe a little bit crude of me, but still, when I think of this creature, I think of caving. And when I think of the Shadowmane, I don't think of caving. And I have done some caving with the Shadowmane. It's just, for me, it's not as enjoyable. I know that's not really a valid excuse. You just want a really good caving creature, but the Barionics really can do that. And again, it's really great at underwater caves as well. You might think, well, the Shadow Mane is just better at underwater caves then, because, you know, it's a really fast swimmer and good in the water. Well, this thing kind of has a slight edge. It doesn't have the hydration buff. Kind of think it should, to be honest, considering the Spino has it, and it's kind of Spino-like. I know it doesn't have the spine bit, but, you know, it makes sense. But yeah, it can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, like you've seen there, so it's a really nice, useful ability for it to have. Now, I'm really one for the Carno, and that's why I put this creature in at the number 2 spot, because this creature is just so overlooked in my opinion. People always go for the Aloe, and yes, now on ASA the Aloe and the Carno pretty much as easy to tame as each other because of the new baby like taming methods thing, but still the Carno in my opinion is just the more preferable creature to me because it's smaller, still deals a lot of bleed damage. Obviously the bleed damage is the same regardless of what creature, but it deals the bleed damage like the Allosaurus, and although maybe it doesn't have the pack buff and all of that, and it isn't quite as powerful a creature, I still think its smaller size, it really just nets it as the better creature for me, and also the level that it's unlocked. I know they're still quite similar, but I still think this is kind of my goal for first carnivore in Ark, and I feel like people overlook this creature for something maybe better that you might want to use instead, and you can obviously go for those creatures as well. But again, I know it kind of comes back to nostalgia a little bit, but I do feel quite nostalgic for this creature. They're some of the first carnivores that I ever tamed, and I still really like using them, and obviously they did have their TLCs and all of that stuff, so they're a lot better now than they used to be, but still I think people just really overlook them and don't use them as much as I think they should be used, as they are really good creatures to use. They're really easy to control, and they deal that bleed damage again, so they really do pack a punch in 2024. So I don't really get why too many people aren't using them, unless everyone's just for some reason going for the Aloes every single time, which, you know, you could say is quite valid, and it mainly just depends on personal preference for that. At least in my opinion, it kind of depends what you want more of a carnivore. Do you want like a smaller carnivore, a larger carnivore, what kind of ability you want, and all of that. Damage and health, you probably just want the highest, but yeah, the Carno's in at number 2. And in at number 1, we have got the Bloodstalker, and maybe necessarily I don't think this creature's overlooked, but the reason why I've actually put it in at number 1 spot is what I use it for. I think people overlook it for, which is why I've put it in at this spot. And in my opinion, the Bloodstalker is the best underwater creature out there, with no exceptions to the rule. It is just miles ahead of any other creature which, you know, maybe might have some slight competition against it, like maybe the Basilo or the Basilisk when that thing actually comes out. I'll make my opinion on that actually when it releases, when Scorched Earth comes out, of course, and also like creatures like the Shadow Mane and all of that. You might say they compete with it, but the Bloodstalker is just, it's so versatile in all it can do. It can glide across the top of the water. Again, the Maven can as well, but in the water it's really fast and agile. You can also seal the creatures, so it's kind of like having an awesome Spyglass mod, but you don't actually need the mod, and you can see the aggroed of creatures, so you can actually see if creatures are aggroed onto you. If you need to get away from them instead of just staring at them and seeing what they do next, you can see if they're aggro to you. They actually, usually when creatures aggro, they'll either attack you or just run away for some reason. Don't know why that really happens, but you know, I get it happens when you get them to high torpor, but even if they don't have high torpor, sometimes the creatures will do that. RKI is a little bit weird, to be fair. But yeah, the Bloodstalker, in my opinion, is the best underwater travel mount, and I think it is really overlooked for that, and it's just seen as a good like traveling mount, and it's good for getting hexagons on Gen 1 because, you know, there's missions that use it and it's a useful creature to learn, but I don't think enough people use it for those underwater abilities, which I really personally love this creature for. In at number 10, we have the Challicatherium, and in my opinion, this creature really does have to just make this list because, like, when you look at it and its taming methods and kind of how useful this creature is, but also how much more useful this creature could be if it did get a TLC, it really makes me feel like this creature is in dire need of one. Maybe a slight change in the tame methods would be sufficient. Maybe don't make it just a normal knockout tame, but maybe have some kind of different feeding material for a passive tame to make it more accessible to actually tame, because getting that beer is certainly something, but, you know, maybe that it gives the creature some sort of character to just its general identity, so maybe that won't go ahead, and that's fine. But if it has just some general quality of life improvements, and actually for me it is mainly the taming method when coming back to it. If it had a more accessible taming method, if its rocks maybe did some more damage and were slightly more aimable, that's probably just my part, that could be useful. And maybe if it had some maybe like an extra special ability or something like that, it could really bring this creature together. And I'm actually keen to hear what you think your ideas should be for these creatures and what TLCs they should actually get. Next up, we have got the Basilisk, and I feel like this is such a cool creature when you think of it, but when you actually maybe use it in practice, it doesn't really hype up to everything. And partly I think it should have some better mobility overall, maybe some extra abilities on top of what it already has, maybe allow it to deal more damage. I think the tone method is fine, it makes sense. It's a little bit irritating, but considering what kind of creature this is, you would probably expect that. I'm fine with it. If they did want to change it in future with a TLC, that'd be fine, but that's not usually what TLCs are about. It would be adding some extra special abilities and like more maybe utilizing that underground ability even further, and maybe like an ability to send shock waves and knock back creatures under the ground and like leap up under them and just demolish them. You could definitely use some really cool features with that as well, which aren't currently in the game. Now, next up, we've got the Giga, and I feel like it's a time at this point where this creature needs some sort of TLC, and maybe it's not in the most dire need, but I really feel like compared to the Barionics and other creatures like that, it's very far behind in just what this creature is and what its abilities are like. And yeah, I know it's a lot easier to tame than a Challicatherium in most cases. It's in some ways a lot more resource intensive because you need all of those trank arrows, but it's not as laborious of a method and less things can kind of go wrong in the taming of this thing. But I still think it's quite dated in how it works as a creature compared to something like Challicatherium. I'm not saying like make it exactly like that creature, but maybe if it had the stats of like a wild Giga, maybe you'd still keep that rage buff if necessary. Otherwise, remove that, as you know it's quite a big hindrance, and the Challicatherium doesn't have that. And I know I'm relating it a lot to that creature, but Ark is a different game now than what it was in 2016, so this creature, it has a lot of dated things about it, which is why I'm putting it on this list. I'm not saying like maybe it's in the most dire need of TLC, but I really do think wildcard should give the Giga at some point a reconsider over, because it's such an influential Ark tame, and I think it deserves something. In at number 7, we have got the Carb Enemies, and I put this thing here as I think it could be a really useful starter tame. It kind of already is, but it could be even better if it had just a little TLC, and maybe increase its movement a little bit, give it some special abilities, possibly some kind of spinning attack that could stun some enemies underwater, maybe give it some better gathering features, possibly something like that. You could even maybe give it the pack buff in a pack. I know it's not really the most useful thing. Again, very keen to hear your ideas on what TLCs you think these creatures should get, and what actually other creatures which I haven't put on this list, which you think you need TLC should actually have. Personally for me, if it had some kind of special attack on top of it, its saddle is fine. Not like it, yeah, the cementing pace is a little bit of a hindrance. You could make that a little bit cheaper, but it kind of makes sense. It is a good underwater creature. I'd say maybe boost its speed a little bit, add maybe more of an essence of damage, maybe make these things better turret soakers. There are just so many good opportunities with this creature, which I think wildcard kind of misses out on, and I feel like it could be a really high step of a level over where the Parasaur was. And the Stego is such a different creature now to what it was before it had that TLC, and if the Carb Enemies could go under similar treatment, maybe if not as OP as the Stego, it could be a really useful thing for the Carb Enemies to have. And I personally think it's quite underrated and people don't give it enough credit, and if it had that TLC, then maybe it would bring this creature to some new heights. Next up, we've got the Angler, the king of harvesting any kind of silica pearls. But personally, I think it can be used and remembered for a lot more than that. It can be just a really great, agile, maybe higher damage dealing creature with some other wealth of abilities, and maybe it could do something with obviously the main thing that defines an anglerfish, which is the light on the front of it, and it could possibly do something. But I'm not actually sure how much it illuminates, but if it would be kind of useful if you could really use it to illuminate your way in the night, that would be quite nice. If it had some kind of basic saddle and armor, that would boost it up another level, and some more special abilities, because all it can really do is attack and just gather some silica pearls. And I feel like you can be really inventive with this creature and its design. Although yes, maybe it's not the most dinosaur-like creature, I still think there's a lot that can be done to this creature to improve it in everything that it stands for, instead of just being a good silica pearl gatherer and just your generic basic ocean tame. At number 5, we got the Pachy, and this creature really just has to be here for me on this list. And it's kind of sad looking at this because it's so useless, but with just a few simple changes it could be a much better creature. Firstly, if it could gather berries, that would put this thing at significantly better heights for general use. Also, I think the mobility of this creature is fine. Its special attack could be utilized in a better fashion if you had more mobility when it was actually charging, because it's not particularly OP. If it dealt a little bit more torpor, that could be nice. If its taming method wasn't so long and laborious, that would make this creature a more defined, useful one. And if it had some maybe special harvesting abilities, or some kind of buff it gave other creatures, or something small like that, like a buff and obviously the ability to gather berries and just a tame method that isn't as difficult, then it could really boost this creature in terms of its abilities and where it actually is in the game, because you can just get a parasaur and that creature is going to do so much more good. And it took absolutely ages to kill this raptor. Personally, I do think these things should deal a little bit more damage just to the general creatures, possibly because they are quite heavily armored creatures. It would make sense. Next up, we've got the Archaeoptics, but I'm also going to put the galley in a similar spot as well, as I think the galley is just lacking in the health department and a bit of damage as well, although it doesn't really need that, and some weight definitely that could drastically improve that creature. And again, maybe a special ability of sorts, maybe like an extra dash. But talking about the Archaeoptics, since the glide suit came out, and the cinema crops after that as well, this creature is pretty much just useless, and it's just an old version of those two things. If you could use this thing like a cinema crops though, and is sort of an alternative to that creature on other maps, as the cinema crops isn't on every map, then it could really boost this creature. It could just be a better use of a creature. You can still use it like a hang glider, but then you wouldn't have to carry it. It could just go on your back normally. And yeah, there's a few things that you can do with this creature which can turn it from something completely useless to something like the cinema crops. At number 3, we've got the Megalosaurus, and the female version, of course, not the male one. That's a good thatch gatherer. Personally, I think, yeah, maybe this is only really used for breeding just Megalosauruses, but you could at least do something with this creature. It can't even attack. It has no attack whatsoever. This is in dire need of some sort of TLC to actually be a useful creature. Apart from that one use, which isn't even really utilizing this creature, it's just essentially using it as a placeholder to make baby Megalosauruses, and then if you get female babies out of that, it's not good. You only want the male babies out of it to get good thatch gatherers and whatever you use general male Megalosauruses for. The female one, it's just, yeah, maybe it doesn't have all the horns and all of that, but I still think it should have some sort of edge, which would be like, why you tame this creature apart from just, oh, I want to breed some Megalosauruses, so I'm going to get both of these. And I know generally most Ark creatures don't have distinction between both genders of creatures, and considering this one does, I feel like Wildcard could do something with this creature to really highlight those differences, and you'd have different uses for both instead of this one just being like utterly useless and obsolete. Next up, we've got the Microaptor, and the reason why I'm putting it so high on the list isn't necessarily because I think it needs the most amount of TLC, but I think its ability is quite a cool and interesting one, and if utilized properly, it could really make this a good sidekick. Again, you just have this just like maybe on your back or on your shoulder. I think you can actually put this thing on your shoulder, but if you have it on your back like a Cinemacrops or another creature, I'm just trying to think, I think the Seeker, whatever it's called, has that same sort of ability. Actually don't, I think that's in a mod, but still, if it had that, and then you could just send it on riders and then it would come back onto you, so you could knock people off their riders and then it would come back to your back. That could just be a really cool, simple ability for this creature to have. And in at number 1 is the Arano, and there are so many things that you can do cool with spiders, and I'm kind of going to put the Onyx here as well, although maybe if you turn the Onyx into something more like the Desmodus, but maybe a slightly dumbed down version that was easier to tame, that could be very useful because that creature is pretty much obsolete. With this creature though, the Arano, if it had the ability to climb up walls, something simple like that, and it actually dealt some reasonable amount of damage and had some decent health and all things like that, then it wouldn't just be a sort of placeholder obsolete creature which you would only tame if you wanted to tame every creature on Ark, and it's actually just a generally huge pain to tame this creature, so I'd recommend a slight change in that taming method. And if you could do that and make this sort of like the Bloodstalker but have some distinction, it could be a really great creature.
So thank you to my wonderful patrons Katerina Puchkova, Karina Thorne, Dominic Masijewski and Ethan Tapia, who have all supported me through Patreon or through YouTube memberships. If you want to join this list, then go join Patreon or YouTube members, but thanks to all of these guys.